Welcome to all our listeners today. This is the third podcast of the mini-series, A Day in a Life, What Does It Mean to Be a Researcher at ATSU? Each episode will have a conversation with accomplished Still University researchers to learn more about what got them hooked on research, how they got their start, the tools that help them stay productive, and what they're excited to explore next. This mini-series is for anyone interested in educational research with any experience level. Here with me guiding the discussion today, you have the TLC team, specifically myself, Quincy, Brittany, Julie, and behind the scenes, Brenda. Please say hello to our listeners, Brittany.
Hello, hello.
Julie.
Hi, everyone.
Julie, who do we have the pleasure of speaking with for today's episode?
We are so excited to be speaking with Dr. Alison Snyder Valier today. Dr. Valier wears many hats, including being the Assistant Director of Research Support and a Professor of Interdisciplinary Health Sciences. She is also a member of the ATSU Research Institute, and in recognition of her excellence in research and in the field of athletic training, she was named a Fellow of the National Athletic Trainers Association in 2015. Dr. Valier's research interests include measuring the patient-based outcomes of athletic training interventions in terms of efficacy and impact on quality of life for high school and college athletes. She holds degrees in psychology, exercise science, and applied physiology, and has published over 60 articles and has been cited over 1,000 times. These are just a few of the reasons we are delighted to be speaking with her today. Dr. Valier, welcome to the Talk, Listen, Collaborate podcast.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be part of this.
Amazing. Welcome. Brittany here. This is a mini series focused on a day in the life of a researcher at ATSU University. Can you share with us what an average day looks like for you?
Sure. As for a day in the life, I think that's a great question. Part of my gut response would be that I don't really have a typical day. With the work I do, there's a lot of variability from day to day. And I imagine that maybe many of the listeners can relate to that as well. A typical day includes some block time for me. Often the first thing in the morning, I block that out because I feel like that's when I'm the most productive and I have the most drive. It feels like I don't go a day without a meeting or two. So those are consistent elements as well. And then I try to prioritize a few must-dos for the day and attempt to tackle them in between the other responsibilities I have, and some days I'm successful or more successful than others. So I think in terms of research, if I think about how I fit that into like a typical day, it more follows seasons, I guess, than typical days. So like I've maybe a variety of seasons of research. So when I'm teaching, it's more challenging to engage in research on a daily basis. When I'm not teaching, I have a little bit more time to think deeper about projects and maybe a little bit more drive to push them forward.
That's so interesting. So you're not the first one who has thought and talked to us about when you're productive versus when maybe you're less productive. How did you find the days in your schedule or the times in your schedule where you found you were more productive?
I think it's just, it's probably evolved a little bit naturally over time. That I've just noticed in myself that if I block some things out in the morning, I can get a lot done. I think it just evolved, really.
Alison, this is Quincy here. Julie did a great job describing your many accomplishments. 60 articles, over 1,000 citations is remarkable. Would love to hear more about your research agenda. Could you tell us about how you first got started in research and what it is about conducting research that has kept you going? It's keeping your interest.
It's a little bit convoluted, but maybe some of the listeners can relate to a windy path. I first got started in research during my undergraduate program of study, and that focus area was actually in psychology. And I attended a small liberal arts school, and one of the big requirements was that you had to do a research project and write a thesis, as well as have oral comps at the end of that. And thankfully, I had a great advisor who helped me navigate that process, but I was so green with research at that time. And so when I finished that, I went off to graduate school, and that's where I studied exercise physiology in my master's and my doctoral studies. And that's really where I learned a lot more details about research and the research process. A lot of the focus that I was doing was on bench or laboratory type research. So, thinking about research design and methods, reducing bias, controlling factors, things like that. But again, it was more heavy on the side of laboratory bench research. And so when I came to ATSU, if I'm completely honest, I'm not sure if I loved research at the time. I wasn't sure that that's what I wanted to do, and what I had been doing maybe didn't really fit with what I was going to be able to do at ATSU, given the background. But I think adding to the greater body of knowledge is something that is part of the faculty role and was an expectation of being a faculty member in our program. And I really wanted to contribute. I wanted to contribute and do that. So I was fortunate to be able to complete a postdoctoral fellowship in clinical outcomes research while I was working at ATSU. Really allowed me to build on my foundation in exercise physiology and those research principles, but then to blend it in my interest in, the lives of people. And so that kind of led me into the areas that I study today. Overall, right now, my agenda is related to helping improve the care provided to patients with sport-related injury. And it feels like a natural fit for me because, again, I had that psychology background and I had the research, and it sort of blended nicely. And unlike some research agendas, I'm not focused on a particular body region or health condition. I'm more focused and interested on the assessment tools and how we can evaluate patients from a whole person perspective. And so the core of my research interest is centered on the idea of whole person healthcare and what needs to be done to ensure patients receive care that promotes positive health outcomes. And I guess I'm just passionate about that. So that's probably how I've been able to keep that going.
So Quincy just mentioned, 60 peer-reviewed articles. That's incredible. So we'd love to know a little bit more about how you do that and tips you might have for others. Do you have a process for your manuscript writing?
Oh, those are great questions. So, and thank you for the nice comments about the work. Those numbers have built over time. So those have been something that didn't just happen. They accumulated, and it's actually really the reflection of numerous collaborations and teamwork. So most of the work I've done involves others, has been collaborative. So I share those numbers with others, but I've been fortunate to be a part of a program where collaboration and collective success. So everybody's individual success makes everything better. That was kind of the culture when I started at ATSU in our program. And that really probably is, what helped, help me nurture that research, that love of research, or those experiences. So that shared interest and a common vision with colleagues was instrumental in getting me started and is my fuel today. I think that is something that listeners who are interested in getting started with research should maybe look to find within their own programs, or people who have similar interests and shared interests. I think that's really important. All of my ATSU colleagues, past and present, within the Department of Interdisciplinary Health Sciences and the athletic training program, have just been hugely important in terms of idea generation, thoughts, getting the research done. And I think the other thing that's really helped too in being successful is that we, as a team or as colleagues, we understand the strengths of each other, and we can play off of those to the success of a project. So that's been helpful too, and have a lot of fun along the way. You also asked about manuscript writing and how I do that. And I think, as listeners might have experienced also, it's tough. It's not easy to always write those, and it takes a lot of time and focus. I actually enjoy the writing, so I think that's a benefit. And what I like about it is, I don't know, kind of the story of it, like what's the story and what am I trying to tell? And I'm, of course, in line with the research findings and all of that, but what's the message I really want to get across? And so I enjoy that. But even though I enjoy it, it's hard to do it. And I think it's something easy to push aside. So again, probably being very purposeful with setting aside time. And then one of the strategies that I use is, if I want to dive into manuscript writing, I can't just say on Tuesday I'm going to write. It's really, for me, a multi-day process. So if I think there's a week that I want to get some writing done, I have to build in a couple of opportunities to start that process. So I have to spend a good chunk of time revisiting the literature, rereading, making sure I've found the most recent articles, and organizing my thoughts. And that's one day. And then it's the next day that I might be prepared to write. So that's kind of the way my process works. It's organizing my thoughts, diving back into the topics, and then writing on a different day.
That's fantastic, Alison. I appreciate that insight and in sharing your experience and how you approach manuscript writing. I remember this old interview with Nicholas Sparks, the author. You know who he is? He wrote the book, The Notebook, right?
Oh, yes, yes.
Turned into a movie. I think he's won a Pulitzer Prize. I could be making that up, but you think of this very accomplished, famous movie that's based on his book that everybody loves who's read it, right? And he's like, I hate writing. And I was like, what? I was blown away, because I think that was a moment for me where I realized, like, writing is difficult. But what it sounds like you've done, Alison, is you've created a process to make it a little bit more user friendly for yourself, where you actually enjoy the process. It sounds like you know, and this is kind of something that I think about too. When I'm staring at a piece of paper, I'm like, oh, this is painful. I don't know what to say. I'm trying to find the perfect words because I haven't read enough. Do you agree with that sentiment? Do you feel the same way? Like, you've just said what I do invisibly without being aware of it. You read, and then it pours out of you because now you have thoughts, you have something to say.
Right. I think I can relate to that. That's sort of how I feel. I can go and stare at a page, but it's because I'm probably not prepared, at least for the type of technical writing that we're talking about. So the reading helps me seeing how other people frame things, the other ideas, if I have a key point, so I like to find those things. And the other thing for me too, and one thing that's a little time consuming is I'm not, a lot of people can just put their ideas down and move. And I'm one that likes to refine, as I want it to start looking shape and like get the shape as I go along. So I tinker a lot with it too, which is time consuming, but it's part of the process. But yeah, but I get that. Maybe that's a way that I make it just through, trial and error, that preparing one day reading really helps prep for the ideas.
Yeah, Alison, I do the same thing. I think we've all done that, sat, in front of a computer with the blank page and a blinking cursor, and that can be so intimidating. So I had a mentor whose suggestion was just get words down. Don't worry how they are. Don't worry how they sound. You can write in a different font color, come back later. And it's such a great suggestion, but it doesn't work with my process because I do the same thing. I want to get something down and then really tinker, get it how I want it to sound, and then move to the next paragraph or the next idea. So I think we have a similar process.
Yeah, it's just hard, Another thing that I do too, just, I don't know, this is a little extension of it, but I focus, as I mentioned, I focus a lot. I call it the story, but whatever, the context and how I frame stuff. But I had an advisor once, and I thought and this was for my dissertation, and I thought I had all these great ideas. I'd spent this time, and like at the end of every paragraph, she just said, so what? So what? So what? And I thought, oh, I put these ideas down, but I never made the point. And so, that's always stuck with me, I think, is like, what's the point? What's the purpose? And so that helps me even focusing my searching of what I'm looking for, because what's the point I need to make, and what do I need to support that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, part of that telling that story is finding the right audience, the right home for that story, right? How do you go about finding the right journal or the right home for your articles?
Finding a target journal is a great question. And it's something that, you need to put a lot of consideration into. I typically don't follow a consistent same process, but I have a variety of elements that are probably that I draw from each time that we're looking to target a journal. So the first step is really working with co-authors to find out what journals they might suggest would be options for the manuscript. We look for journals that are familiar in our field, but then if we do want to speak to a different audience or get the message in front of different people, we'll look outside the field for potential opportunities. I often look at articles that have been published on similar topics and see where people are publishing them. That's always a nice place to start. So I think there's a variety of factors that go into that decision-making process. I will say, though, that one thing I'm a firm believer of, and I've had challenges with this over time, is that you can get rejected when you submit a manuscript, and you can get rejected on a well-written manuscript. It just doesn't fit their mission, or they're not interested in the topic. But I really feel strongly that if the research is good, and like if you're confident in the research and what your findings in the message that there is a home somewhere. And so trying out a couple of different options and just staying the course is something I suggest to people. Don't give up if you had some negative feedback or you received a rejection. You're likely to find a home when you find the right spot, right?
I'm watching Quincy nod. I think we've all been there. I think it's a really great suggestion to remember to stay the course, and also that oftentimes that rejection comes with feedback, and that might be really important, right? The research might be sound, but how you're telling the story might be being lost on a reader, or there's a different way to present that story or narrative to get that point across. So I love that suggestion.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think it's the feedback you get is valuable. Consider that as you go to reformat for another journal, if that's what you choose to do, but stay the course because that's important.
So transitioning into educational research specifically, as a clinician, an educator, and a researcher, what does educational research mean to you?
Educational research is valuable for so many reasons, but I'll touch on a couple that are I guess how I see it. One of the goals of education is to create high quality student experiences that lead to great student outcomes. And so, as I think about that in terms of healthcare, we want strong, effective, competent, knowledgeable, compassionate, and skilled healthcare professionals. And so research that helps to support that goal is really needed. So I think about that in terms of educational research.
That's awesome. Thanks, Alison, for that. Continuing this conversation about educational research specifically, how do you think you've used or conducted educational research to answer questions related to issues related to your students' learning, maybe your own teaching practices? How do you connect educational research to your teaching?
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's a great question as well. My agenda isn't, solely focused on educational research and educational outcomes directly, but I've had a few opportunities to look at educational outcomes and some other things. But I think what I've done is I have purposely looked for ways to connect my work to education, whether it's sharing the ideas that I've found through research in front of, in terms of publishing in education related journals or presenting at educational focused conferences. So I have been purposeful about that. I've collaborated on a few studies on educational outcomes, as I mentioned. And then we also recently published an educational technique related to a teaching strategy on the social determinants of health. So I've done I've had a few direct research experiences, and then others that I think are linking to it. But another way I think that I tie in my research interests with education and teaching and all of that is that, I study things that I can apply to what I'm teaching to students. And so the work and effort that I put into the research I do also applies to how I'm trying to educate as well. So I have some synergies that way too. And I in some ways I'm a little fortunate that the courses I teach relate to my areas of interest, relate to my research. And I realize too that maybe not all listeners have that, but it's certainly something that is helpful when you can make that happen.
Absolutely. So kind of building a little bit on Brittany and Quincy's questions, I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about what you think are common barriers or misconceptions about engaging with educational research, really both as a knowledge creator and a consumer.
Yeah, I think when I think about barriers, and I guess I think some of the barriers we have are maybe present no matter if it's educational research or bench research or clinical research. So for consumers, I think one of the challenges is, and I think for any type of research again, is that finding research studies that are relevant to your specific interests. I think we also have to be, open enough to look for things that are in similar populations that you can draw from and apply, but there's a lot that's out there, and finding the research that really applies to what you're interested in takes some work. So I think that's a barrier. I also think that it can be overwhelming, the amount of information out there. And so it's a lot to digest. And so that can, be a barrier, just the sheer volume of what's out there. And then translating what you find to your own teaching or those things, how you do that in your own system, having the confidence to do that. I think those are some barriers as well. At least I find those myself personally. So for consumers, I think those are some of the top barriers or things that I think about. For research, I think one of the barriers, and this is probably with everything, is time to be able to really do the research in the way that you want to do it. I think accessing populations can be difficult, and just the process to do that in the right way. So that can be a challenge as well. So those are a few of the barriers I see. And I think they relate to educational research as well as the other areas too.
Yeah, you mentioned, the plethora of studies available, right? With Google Scholar and databases that you have thousands and thousands of articles at your fingertips instantaneously, right? So I kind of call it going down a rabbit hole sometimes when you start with one study and that leads you to another and that leads you to another. Have you found yourself in those rabbit holes, and how do you climb back out?
Oh, that's a great question. I'm always I find something and I dive down and I'm gone before I can. It takes me a bit to climb out, but I don't know. I mean, I think, some of it's fun. It leads you to some new things. So sometimes I think a rabbit hole can be very fruitful in terms of idea generation, but I think it's okay at some point to know when to stop, take what you found, the top ones that look most interesting, and maybe narrow your dive that way.
One of the things we're really interested is getting the word out of what types of really great research are happening around the university. So from your position as in the leadership of the research support team, what themes do you see in the research being conducted by faculty, by students, or by staff all across the university?
There is a lot of research going on from a variety of, the students, staff, faculty. And so there's a lot, which is really exciting. One of the resources that I think it is great to explore if you want to learn about what's going on and potential collaborators is the research newsletter that Deb Goggin puts together out of research support. That, it identifies who are faculty, who are adjunct faculty, who are students. It identifies the different topics. And so it's just a fantastic resource to get a sense of, who's doing what and what areas might be synergistic with, what you want to do as well. So I think that's a great place to start if you want to find people with similar interests.
And just to follow up on that, let's say I'm a faculty member in my corner at ATSU and I want to get on that newsletter. How would I go about that?
Deb puts out a call and asks people to send information to her if they have a publication or a presentation, and it's based on different quarters of the year. So that's generally how the information is gathered. I know I shouldn't speak for all of Deb's processes, but she engages in some other efforts to find works from ATSU faculty. But respond to the call because we really want to highlight all of the works of faculty and staff and students. So if you have some products, get that information to us, and we're happy to put that in the newsletter.
Yeah, that's awesome. We keep an eye on that. Definitely, we see recurring names and a lot of the themes, and even the collaborations that are going on inside of ATSU and with external partners with the research. It's an awesome opportunity to get Deb's doing a great job getting that out. Besides this opportunity, backing all the way up, maybe one of our listeners is considering getting their start. I want you to weigh in. I would love to see what you might recommend on how you might say a future researcher, somebody that's just getting their start. Maybe they've started, but maybe could use a little bit of help to keep moving things forward. What would be your advice to our listeners?
I think, getting started, one of the, I think, whenever you want to get started, I think it's always good to consider your schedule, your timing, and, really reflect on when is it, like, to figure out when is a good time to start, right? So we all have these ideas and we want to get started, but I think that's important because you don't want to try to get engaged in something like the research process when you're going to have a very busy schedule. So I think being just aware of what you have ahead is good is advice I would give so that you can plan right. I think finding a collaborator is essential. I spoke about that earlier, but collaborations for me have been invaluable. It's where you share ideas. It's where there can be some accountability to help you push forward. There's opportunities for learning and growth. So find someone to work with. I think that's important. And And from my experience around our university, people want to help other people. I think that, and if they're not the person to help, they might point you in the direction of another person that might be. So I think, that I think that's the general sense I get. And so I would encourage people to reach out rather than being, intimidated to do that. And then I do think another piece of advice, just even for getting started, well, I think you could also go and look at all of the support services we have. If you wanted to reach out to the research support, where we have biostatisticians and research coordinators and project managers, and we also have a scientific writer. So there are some internal resources that might be helpful as a place to get started. And then another piece is I do think it's important that if you want to get involved in research, that you do realize that it's a commitment a bit. It's a method and a science. And so it's going to take some getting in there and learning about those things. But so I think that's another thing to think about as well for somebody starting out is to enjoy learning something new and learning about the process, because it's the foundation, for you moving forward.
That fantastic. We talk about that all the time, especially if, when we're fortunate enough to meet with folks in our own ways to talk about educational research. We say that we find collaborators, find people that are somewhat wired the same way as you. And it's funny you say that it's a commitment. It is. I say this like it's kind of a marriage in some points, right? The research process can take as long as a year. And so you may get sick of them, but if you could find somebody that you can hang out with for more than a year to get the project done, I think that's super crucial. This sets us up perfectly, Julie, for the next question. Here we go about collaboration.
Yeah, you've mentioned collaboration and offered a really wonderful reminder that research isn't a solo effort. I always think, it takes a village, right? So how do you manage collaborations, like determining who will do which tasks and how to navigate different schedules?
Collaborations, I think it's a little bit of it is, maybe a little trial and error. But again, I think, knowing your team and knowing who you're working with and knowing what their strengths are, and then capitalizing those on assignments and the work to move it forward. I think that's important. And it'll look different depending on who the players are. But, I think you can spread, sometimes you need big team collaborated efforts on idea generation and what methods you want to do. There might be different people who are tasked with analysis, interpreting results, and then mapping out discussions and who's best, whose strengths are best to work with the different pieces. I think is just that's really how I work with collaboration. And I think it's also important to realize that sometimes the collaborations can ebb and flow. Sometimes it's really fun and sometimes it's really stressful. Sometimes there's a lot of work and then other times it's a little bit of a lower time. But ultimately that experience hopefully is very rewarding at the end, and fulfilling. And I think, if you work to build those collaborations, it can just snowball into more projects together. So that initial work to build that can maybe be longer lasting. And then of course that connection with others, I think is part of the thread that keeps the projects moving.
Amazing. I want to touch back on the resources that we talked about. ATSU has a plethora of resources available to all of our educators, staff, and I'm very impressed to hear from multiple people how welcoming the research community here is. You can walk up to anyone and ask a question. I think that's really impressive. One of the things with how many resources we have available, sometimes it can be confusing of who handles what or where the line can be drawn. Can you help our listeners understand the similarities and the differences between research support and research nexus?
There is some confusion because there's lots of different people who are involved in research at the university. So I think it's one place to start, and this might help the listeners, is to think that most or some of the entities we're talking about today come out of the Division of Research Grants and Scholarly Innovations. And so that's the broader, bigger umbrella division where there's sponsored programs, which is the group that handles most of the external grants and opportunities like that. There's research support, which is more the service engine for helping people do and complete their research. And then there's also the Still Research Institute, which has different centers that have their own purpose and mission to drive research initiatives forward in very focused areas. And so they're all led by different people. And so they're almost their own unique entities, but they also have they're synergistic as well. And so the research support has the research coordinators and project managers, the biostatisticians, and the scientific writer. And Still Research Institute is made up of faculty from all across, faculty members from all over the university in different focused areas. And one of the elements or programs they do is Research Nexus. So Research Nexus is, and I don't fully want to speak for what Research Nexus is, but from, a little introduction here is they do a lot of educational opportunities, promoting different research on campus. And so that's falls really under the Still Research Institute, whereas research support doesn't fall under the Still Research Institute. So it's a different entity.
No, I think that's helpful. I think that there's a lot going on. We get these emails flying around our inbox, and sometimes it can be a blur, right? Who's who? Why should I go to one versus the other? So I think that's helpful, and especially from your perspective, because I think your team, your experience here is central to the university system and the resources available. So thank you for sharing your perspective on that. Just a couple more questions about this, and thinking about, in addition to research support systems, we kind of talked about Research Nexus in some other ways. What other infrastructure would you say is pivotal to getting engaged in research, and specifically educational research? Do you have any thoughts on that you might recommend?
So there are I think we have a lot of opportunities in terms of research or support services at ATSU. We have the internal grants program. So that's a funding or an annual competition that provides funding for research to faculty and staff and students. And there are some specific internal opportunities for educational research. So that's a great thing for the listeners to check out if they're interested in what those opportunities are. There are also some special grant initiatives that come out that are mission driven, and some of those have been education related. We also have some other funding support mechanisms that are offered through the university in terms of publication, reimbursement fees, and travel fees, or small grants. So those are other elements that might be explored depending on the question. And all of this information I'm talking about is available on the sponsored programs website. So it can all be found there, but those are some things to think about. And there are a couple of, and I don't know if this is what you were specifically asking about, but I think a couple of rather maybe less known opportunities are that if you did have a promising line of research and you submitted an external grant and you were able to secure funding, there are some researcher reinvestment policies that the university supports. And there are some, the policy, find those in the portal, but there is incentives for researchers to secure external funding. The funding, there are certain requirements to meet that, but that's another thing that some faculty may be less aware of, that is open as another resource to support research and incentivize.
Fantastic. Some of those I wasn't aware of, so very helpful. And you had me at money at the beginning. That's awesome. I don't think that people understand like how fortunate, how supportive ATSU is as far as funding research projects. Not only the calls that come out in April, there's intervals that come out throughout the year that can get, no matter how small or large, that will help you get started with your research projects. Witnessing that and even watching the support that you all have provided through research support, guiding those type of activities, those efforts, has been amazing. I'm like, you understand how cool this is? This is amazing. So thank you for sharing that. Thank you for what you do. Absolutely. Julie.
You've given us so much to think about today. Do you have any final thoughts, advice, or recommendations you'd like to share with the listeners?
Thank you all for having me, and we've covered a lot of topics today, and I'm certainly open to future discussions with any of the listeners if they have questions or want to follow up on any of the ideas shared. But I guess my biggest piece of advice is that ATSU does have a lot of resources and support. And again, I've said this before, but I think people are generally want to be helpful, and if they're not the person, they might help you find somebody as a starting point. So don't be shy about reaching out. And then I guess my other, I don't know, maybe final thought is with most things, start small if you're just getting started, but with some plan and some support, hopefully you can launch a fun journey into research.
This is the part in the show we take a moment to reflect on what our guest has shared. Brittany, would you like to take the first shot and share what your biggest takeaway was from today's discussion?
Yeah, there was a lot there. And I think the takeaway that I'm walking away with is that while I knew about some funding opportunities, she really opened my eyes to look into other opportunities that I wasn't even aware of. So I will be definitely visiting that sponsored program's website, and who knows what I'm going to learn about. So I'm super thrilled about that.
Absolutely, Brittany. So many new ideas of ways to get support for different research projects. I think for me, one of my takeaways was just I think Alison gave us a great reminder that we go through seasons, right, throughout the year, and to give ourselves some permission and grace to find the season where we're going to be most productive on new projects, right? That takes a lot of effort to spearhead new projects or learn new skills, and to find the right season for that, but then to carve away the time. So dedicate the time, but recognize that may not be every Monday throughout the year. Maybe there's peak times for that, but setting aside and being intentional about when's your season for research.
Yeah, and if you think about the research process, one of the things that really like epiphany light bulb moment for me early on in the conversation, she talked about how she outlines her day. I believe this. I don't always practice it, but I believe that research requires attention consistently. Like she said, is you just don't show up on Tuesday like, oh, I'll take an hour on Tuesday. You don't even really. I don't even think it works if you give a whole day to focus on research. I think what she described to me is about I need to block room one day to do my reading and rereading, right? And then the next day is the writing day. And then I do that all over again. To me, what she described is like this iterative, regular, consistent, like spaced practice. We talk about the learning theory of spaced practice. Research is difficult. It's messy. It's hard. You've got to find a way to make it part of your day more than just every now and then inconsistently, or even just once a week. I don't think it works, to be honest, in my opinion. Some of the more productive researchers, somebody that has over 1,000 citations, are you kidding me? That's no easy feat. And I think it's because she probably has her process pretty locked in. So I was excited to hear that. Some of it, I was like, yes, this is what I need in my life too. You need a regular cadence, and the fact that she's reading and rereading and rereading, love that. So glad that she was here to share that perspective. I feel like I'm 1 inch taller after talking to her today. That was awesome.
Well, and Quincy, have you seen with the new updates in Google Calendar, you can actually block time on your schedule for certain tasks. And I think that's such a great way of, if you are interested in dedicating time to different research tasks, right? Today is my rereading day. Great, I can add that to my calendar and feel accountable to that time, and give myself that space for it. You can mark it as busy or free. You can check it off when you're done. That might be a helpful tool for folks.
Fantastic point. Guess what I'm doing as soon as we're done here? I'm sprinting to my calendar to check out that feature, to block some time to do some research writing. Absolutely. Fantastic point. This is a great time to just make some shout outs here. We'd love to thank a few folks. Special thanks to Miss Brenda Jackson, without her help, none of this would be possible. Behind the scenes, she's putting this together for our podcast today. And every time we offer this, also want to thank CNM, our friends in CNM, Amanda Martinez and Miss Roxanne Layfield. A shout out to them. They've really helped us to be able to get this going as well. Our library, our friends in library, right? Without you, great research wouldn't be possible, and all the services and resources that you provide. That's awesome. Want to thank our guest here today. Special thanks to Dr. Alison Snyder Valier for taking time out of her busy schedule to join us and share her perspectives. Most of all, I want to thank each and every one of our listeners. Thank you for clicking on play to hear what conversation we have. Hopefully you got something out of it. Let us know what you think by clicking the link in the discussion. There's a survey there. Let us know what you thought of today's discussion, the podcast. At the same time, make sure you enroll in the Level Up program, the TLC Level Up program. You're going to get credit for this. You do this 5 times. Plus, you take one of the courses, you'll get credit for one of the levels. And this series is about research, so you'll get credit for the educational research level. So make sure you do that. That's super easy. Hopefully, you want to get that credit. This is your friendly TLC team, Quincy, Brittany, Julie, and Brenda saying bye for now. Thank you.